Welcome to The Disruption Is Now. Join us on this enlightening journey as we explore how AI is impacting our jobs, careers, lives, and the human experience. Each episode, host Greg Matusky will converse with visionaries and innovators at the forefront of AI, diving into its challenges, opportunities, and impact. So buckle up as we venture into the heart of disruption, and together, let's unfold the future.
The conversations continue, and quite frankly, I've been having an off-camera conversation with Mark Gilbert. He is the CEO of Zocks Communication, and Zocks, I'm sorry.
Zocks, no worries.
Zocks Communication. I always do that. And he's got a novel platform for advisors in helping them to take and capture notes and put that downstream as far as their cascade of to-dos and whatever.
Yeah.
And we were talking off camera just about the rate of exponential rate of development of AI. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And let's go back to that. Like, what surprised you most about the advent? First of all, your background is in coding, I understand.
Yes, yeah. So my background, went to school as an electrical engineer, but was coding since I was quite young. Spent a lot of time at Microsoft. Building a number of enterprise platforms and a lot of their cloud infrastructure, like what is now Azure. Took a few other companies, went to a startup after that. I was at a company called Twilio most recently, and then we started Zocks about 2.5 years ago now. Originally with the goal of using this, this technology to extract information from conversations. There's all these things at Twilio. It's a conversational, essentially, platform and communications that are programmable. So all of a sudden you can start to get, this whole area of the world that has kind of been off, out of bounds for computers, I'd almost say, right? Like, we all use Zoom and you can record it and things like that, but none of that data is really in databases.
Yeah,
and things
certainly
like that.
a separate input, right?
Totally, yeah, it's just separated out. And now all of a sudden you can see all of that, obviously in financial services where relationships are so important and there's so many discussions going on, that data is phenomenally valuable. And it kind of gives you insight into things that I think probably people had good intuitions about before, but was never actually easily validatable.
It is interesting, I never really had exposure to conversational AI.
Yeah.
Right? In Siri and all the developments that were made there and some of their shortcomings. But it really is kind of the nascent of what we see in generative, if I understand correctly, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think a while ago, we'd call it NLP, natural language processing, is kind of what Siri and, an Alexa will do on a counter. So you start a timer, load whatever. But now you can actually really pull meaning out and data out of long conversations, right? Which just, how long you talk to Siri, it's for about 2 seconds, right? So all of a sudden now you can have an hour and a half client conversation and not just get things like summaries, but actually very structured information of who are their children? How old are they? What are these key life events that they may or may not be going through? And I think whenever we see these things from previous, I would say evolutions in technology, we saw this going from what we would call on-premise software to the cloud is when Google kind of, I'll say, started and came into its own, the scale of data was just phenomenal compared to what you would do in a database before that. And I think everyone at the start starts to do what they were doing before, with the new technology, but then very quickly, all of these new scenarios start to come out, and that's why, Google could never run on a machine. It's too big, right? And we're seeing the same thing in this case, where a lot of people are trying to save time and do all these things that are really helpful, and that's kind of I would say, the first gen that we see. But now that a lot of this data you can structure, you can get it out, and you can query it, you can start to have insights that you wouldn't really have been able to have before without reading through just tons and tons of notes, right? Which nobody does really at scale.
So help me understand then.
Yeah.
You had the world in your palm. You're at Microsoft and you're doing coding. And I guess I'll quote Casablanca here, of all the gin joints and all the places in all the world, you decide to land in the advisory market, right?
Yep.
Why here? Why now? Of all the places you could have gone with this skill set of yours.
So when I left Microsoft, I went to a company that was quite small at the time called Hearsay Social at the time. It was called Hearsay Systems after. They actually just sold to Yext, a public company. And I got there when it was quite small. It was like, I think about 30-ish people. One of the founders had worked with me before at Microsoft, and the other founder was, she's quite amazing. And so starting that, I just frankly wanted to learn and build new companies. Learned a ton there for quite a while. I was the CTO. I started off running the product team and building that out, and then the CTO. And then after about 7 years there, it focused purely on financial services and some of the insurance market as well. And then went to Twilio to run really their like worldwide communication infrastructure. And Twilio is like a set of APIs that allows you to like program messaging and phone calls and a lot of other things as well. And as well as onboarding and everything else. And so with that, we started to see what enterprises were doing with communication, like especially large like banks and things like that. And then so when you see the AI improvements and these LLMs coming out, and before kind of like the GPTs or these like BERT models that Google had, and so we started using those, and we started to realize like we could actually extract data from these. And then we applied it to financial services for a couple reasons, but the big one is we actually were familiar with it. And when we started talking with people about it more and more, there's a huge need. Like it's very exciting and fun, frankly, to build a product that removes a lot of the work that people don't like doing, right? Like it's very easy for us to be like, do you like typing in notes and doing data entry? And like nobody does, right? So like it's kind of a fun thing in that case.
So then the idea of Zocks, I want to say it right. Sorry, I mispronounced it earlier.
We have socks at the booth too if you want to go get them later.
Well, I could use a pair. So that starts up. You were a career corporate employee.
Yep.
Now you're going to be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
What's that experience like?
It's been very interesting. I think one of the advantages of being what I will call later in career, because I'm not in my 20s or my 30s, is I've had a lot of people work with me and for me before, and we've also been able to get a fairly healthy amount of venture investment because of our backgrounds. And so we've actually been able to get a very high quality team together very quickly, and we've all, not all of us, but most of us have worked together. So it's been really exciting and good that way. There's a whole bunch of challenges, when you're starting a company. And I think one of the added things in this space is things are moving just very, very quickly, right? So it's like you can have whatever thesis you want, but ultimately, we see some things improve extremely quickly and other things not.
So knock my Zocks off. Tell me what the app actually does.
Yeah, so what we do is we essentially listen to conversations that people have with their clients. We do that in a way that doesn't require recording. We essentially are transcribing it in real time. And then with that, we get a lot of different data, and it really depends what the company wants or the advisor wants. But to start off, we will build, as I was saying, people typically want to start with things that are what they do today, right? So we will create a note that they can put in CRM. We will create follow-ups for them to put in CRM. We will create an email for them.
And this is automated. It
all automated, so you walk out of the meeting and this all generates. They can send the email to their client. All of that is, they can, just given the way generative AI works, they can actually take one of their existing emails, load it into Zocks, and then we will mimic it. So if they're very formal, we'll be very formal. If they're very concise, we'll be very concise. If they're very casual, we'll be very casual.
We'll mimic my typos. That's my question.
It's a good question.
I have start putting typos in AI generated content
just to see,
just to let clients know that
it's real. It's a good idea. So we do that. I would say that's where a lot of people start. But then in addition to that, we can capture and do capture these things around what are the big life events? What are the financial facts that came out that you can put into a table? And that allows us to do things like start to build a profile for the household or the client over time. So if they mention that they have 2 kids in a conversation, then in the next one they mention that a brother-in-law lives in Vancouver, they will add all that. We can add all that together, I should say, and essentially build up these profiles, push into CRM. And then in addition to that now, because once we have this data, we can actually do what we would call a diff to their profile. So we can look in a CRM system and shortly a planning system and say, hey, from everything that you just talked about with this person, here are the notes and everything, but here are 5 data points, maybe their insurance policy coverage or their income last year. And, it may say, hey, you have their income in their profile set at 100, but they just told you they made 115. Do you want to update it? And so you can basically walk out of a meeting, all of that's captured, and then essentially just have the data start to flow into the systems that you want. And then at the firm level and the advisor level, we can then start to give them insights and start to say like, hey, when people are in this situation, maybe of this age and this net worth, with these life events going on, here are the things you should go do, and allow them to essentially query the system.
So where is this going? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of companies, and they all seem to be, in some ways, the blind man and the elephant, right? Yeah. Some are touching the tail, some are touching the trunk, some are touching the legs, and they have particular slivers of the process down. Yeah. They may make it easy to get unstructured data, not just voice, but into the system on onboarding, or they may make it easy to review and summarize very technical estate planning documents. So is there an end-to-end coming somewhere, do you think?
It's a good question. I think we see in the short, medium term, the lines are probably going to stay somewhat consistent. And by that I mean, like if you look at planning software, and like there's a whole bunch of data that sits in there, there's a whole bunch of data that comes from there. We think it's mostly those that are going to be doing things like processing documents, taking it in. There's like different types of legal, like estate planning is one you mentioned. A similar set of situations with tax, right? Where it's like, hey, here are all my, documents I got, start processing them. And so we do see, I would say like, versions of each of those things. For us, we believe the conversational data, and what we really optimize for is getting the conversational data like digitized, not just like in a recording, but like in a structured way you can work with it. And then updating these other systems and playing with them. And that really, at the highest level, does two things. It's allowing firms to scale allowing firms to scale in a way that they just haven't been able to before. So they need to continually offer more personalized service. That's possible without having, a ton of associates. Frankly, the compliance and privacy requirements are not getting any lighter. So those, continue to go. And so that's our kind of North Star and where we move towards. As we say, conversational data, not just voice like this, but also, like emails and all these things. Like we can process a lot of these today. And there may be some documents that we'll pull in there, but we do really see most likely the planning systems and the custodian systems doing a lot of those things.
So what surprised you most about this crazy journey that we're on? We come from different worlds.
Yes.
I'm on the generative side, you're on the data
like the lower level coding side. I would say for me, we talked about this a little bit, off camera before, but even for me, where I've seen multiple evolutions, if you will, right? Like the mobile evolution, the the cloud evolution, and the web. Frankly, I'm not young. The speed of this is extremely strong, and so I think at some level, we believe there's probably a bit of a bubble going on right now. Like everyone's excited, money's flowing around everywhere. But on the flip side, when you look at the impact it's having already, like there's there, right? It's there. And I mentioned to you before, I think when we started the company, really kind of at the beginning of 2022, we thought it would take us about 4.5 years to get where we got shortly after 2. And that's just continuing, right? Like the things we can do are phenomenal. And so I think honestly, it's a little unnerving for some people, right? Like just where's the technology end? How does it go? How do we even think about what this is going to look like in 2026 or 2028? But for us, it's super exciting.
And before we started the camera rolling and the audio being recorded, you asked me. I have shared with you what I saw as the evolution and how excited I was with each stage of that. I won't go over every stage, but I'll never forget the first time I saw a GUI interface in copy being moved in text, in a font.
I remember that.
Not Courier, but a font. You could choose the font.
I remember like WordPerfect and Word when you could first load in, in Windows and see them.
And you'd have to buy a new set of fonts, right? And you'd get it, and then you'd realize it doesn't have an italics version. But it was amazing because you could move the type independently on the screen, and now that the first time I saw it was cumbersome, awkward. It took forever for the hourglass to drain, but you could see the flash of brilliance of what would open. And then with the internet, we were very proud. I was there at the dawning of that revolution. We worked with many early e-commerce plays, and were a big part of promoting that. And then with smartphones and social media. And you asked me, is this different?
Yeah.
And what did you say? Do you remember your answer to that?
My answer is it is different, right? Like, things are different this time in the sense of, again, the speed, but also if there's a whole new just set of capabilities. It's almost like the first time you discover computers and how to make them do anything is pretty magical, I would say, for most software engineers and programmers. It's like that again, right? Because all of a sudden, it's not just like you have a chip that can do these things. It's now you have this system that can actually really like understand and infer and do all of these things that just weren't possible. Like, computers have always been really good at math, right? They've been really good at math, and anything that can kind of get like, put down into a finite set of, equations or outputs, it's been very good at. And so now the fact, like, we've been amazed. Someone asked me, like, yesterday we were talking about just like sentiment analysis, and that's like, whether someone's happy or sad or anything else. And we've realized that, like, people used to do this by like listening to their voice and trying to say, are they like uptone or downtone? And now the systems literally can look at like paragraphs of text and actually become really accurate on, are they happy or sad? Are they being sarcastic? Like, things like that are just, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard for us to understand, frankly.
For sure.
Right? Like, kids don't. I have 2 kids. They don't understand sarcasm for a long time. Now they understand it too much. But all of these things are now possible. I think on the technical side, the question is, like, how do we use this, right? Like, what can we do?
So the question becomes, do you think there's an underlying awareness of the machine that can do that, right? Do you think, as we said earlier, it's one thing to be predictive and to do the next likely word will be cow, right?
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
I think there is more, like, I think as for people who don't know this, right, like the way these systems work is they literally look at the last set of words and they just generate the next most likely word. And that seems overly simplistic. But what we see is there's a lot of knowledge in that system, right? It's almost like you've taken the internet along with all of like the opinions on the internet and the understandings and all the text there and put it in a bottle, and now you can ask it these things. And so there does seem to be a very strong understanding of things that are well beyond like being able to guess the next word, right?
Yeah.
And if something is there, and it's the point of like, is this thing becoming kind of sentient at all? Is it not? And like Bill Gates recently gave a talk where he's like, we honestly don't know how they work, right? Like, we just, like, they're doing things that we would not expect, and we have no idea how that's happening.
And for me, it's a great joy to use it because it's almost as if I'm playing an instrument.
Yep.
I've written all my life. I've tried to teach other people to write. I've gained a basic understanding of the structure of writing.
Yep.
And when I see the machine, I feel like I'm playing a song on a piano.
Yeah, that's exactly. I would say that's a very similar feeling to programming them as well. Like, we have this, one of the things that is a little more recent in the last year or two, is something called chain of thought. So you can essentially take these systems and say, like, ask it this, then ask it this. Like, kind of break down the way you would break down a math problem or, anything else.
Exactly.
And when you see it do those things, you're just like, wow, like, that's really good, right? And maybe, I think all of us have seen, like, whenever you need to start writing and it's a blank page, it's really hard to get going. As soon as you're like, what are the 6 topics I should cover in this or in my presentation? And it starts to break it out. And then you keep going and going, and it just keeps filling it in. It's really phenomenal. Like, to your point, like, that's a really good analogy. It's like playing an instrument. You're almost waving your hand, and things are happening that would have taken a huge amount of time and effort before.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I
Awesome.
really appreciate your time, Mark.
You as well.
Great conversation. There's been
you.
A steady stream of great conversations today.
Awesome.
My head's kind of swirling. I've got to big assignment due tonight, and I got to put some of these thoughts in there as far as
There's a lot going on.
AI. I owe a client a positioning statement, and this has helped me fashion it even more. So I appreciate your help.
You as well. Thanks very much for your time.
Great talking to you.
Thanks.
Conversations continue here at AdviseAI. We've had a lot of good discussions with a lot of businesses who are really applying AI to help the advisory market. Now we're going to take a little bit of a twist, and I'm joined by Rachel Witkowski, and she is the tech AI reporter at Financial Planning Magazine. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, what's new in AI?
It's a lot.
Yeah. Seems to be.
I think anybody, if you see the Michael Kitces map and a lot of other providers, it's like doubled, I would argue double or tripled in the last year or two.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who would have thought,
wild.
right? Who would have thought a technology that was right down your wheelhouse, my wheelhouse, as a language-based technology? Something different than what had been previously used to communicate with machines.
Yeah, and the same for reporting and writing. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can get an AI tool to write at least sections of what I can do.
So what are the AI tools you're using? How are you using it in your career?
It's interesting. So without promoting one company over the other, I will say thanks to an advisor, he had recommended Jasper AI. And I've tried a couple different large language modeling, but I liked that one a little bit better for right now.
So Jasper's more templated, right?
Yeah, and I can kind of, I liked, it was easier to customize to my voice, and if I'm covering a company, I can sort of plug in that website, it'll read the website real quick. It's not always accurate, but at least gives me a couple paragraphs of quick descriptions on a certain, like an ETF or maybe a more complicated trading product that I can kind of streamline faster than how I can think it up.
Now let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Do you like sports?
Sometimes.
Okay. What's your favorite sport?
I would probably say football and then soccer.
Okay. All right. And I would say mine might be the NBA.
Okay.
So Jasper's very football, right? It's templated, right? It's played on a defined field, right? With 5, 10, 15-yard markers. It's very, very programmed, right? Templated.
Yeah.
The NBA is jazz. It's very free-flowing, right?
Okay.
So I like just to riff. So I don't use templated, I don't use Jasper AI. I just use ChatGPT and I riff.
Interesting.
And I say I riff. I just talk to it like I might talk to you or others, and that seems to most appeal to me. Everyone's different. I mean, as we go down this, that's one thing I learned. In my firm, 124 professionals, we've held 102 AI training sessions in the last year. And everyone finds something different about it. Just like the conference here today. Many companies coming at it in a different direction. Of who you've spoken to, what are the companies that interest you and what they're doing in bringing AI tools to the advisory market?
Interesting. Oh man, there's so many. I just left a panel with Brooke Juniper, the CEO of Tiffin Sage, and they were talking about creating ways to streamline processes for the advisors so that they could attract more younger clients. And they're, I think I'm more so interested in how they're using data and if a company can really explain it well. And she's one of those that talked about, what's under the hood. Right. And really understanding the data that you have. And that's somebody who kind of understands how AI can be applied in the space. I will say probably 1 in 3 to 5 advisors that I interview, they'll bring up FP Alpha as a really great product that can kind of streamline and understand those estate planning documents, those more complex. They're a broader known name. There's so many.
There is so many, and they all, I said earlier, it's kind of like the blind man touching the elephant, right? Some are at the tail, some are at the trunk, some are at the legs, and I'm just intrigued whether there will be some sort of end-to-end solution which will put it all together somewhere out there in the world. Because right now I see everyone working on different user cases in problems.
Yeah, to your point, you brought up something really interesting because I'd just gotten off a panel and an advisor came up to me and was like, I don't use any AI. And I was like, well, why is that? You're at an AI conference.
Right, yeah. What would
which
be
I'm glad you're here.
Right.
And he was just saying there's all these different applications and there's so much friction between. He's like, I just, to your point, I just want something to be really seamless, like an overlay. And I'm like, well, that is being created. It does exist.
Yeah, I think many of these companies will expand their small sliver and do more of it, or they will work with partners to be able to pass them off more easily. So the onboarding will then be easily committed to the note taking, committed to the legal document summarization and preparation and things like that. So how long have you been at Financial? Tell us your story.
So I'll try to streamline this one.
All right.
So I've been at financial planning 8 months. The reason I think why they pulled me over was I had worked for their parent company, Horizon, twice before. So I'd worked at American Banker for over a decade, and I was an editor there. Sort of between that, I went to the Wall Street Journal, so I was helping launch their FinReg Pro. And so I covered a lot of, at the time, it was like crypto and fintech. So I've had almost 8 to 10 years of tech experience, more so on the banking and a little bit on the wealth management side. And so from there, I ended up leading teams at Forbes Advisor and working for Bankrate. So I've had a lot of different experiences, but all within finance.
That's a great background for what you're facing here, I'm sure. Talk a little bit about where do you think this is all going? I mean, now you've had 9 months of talking about technology and AI. What do you think the future holds for this?
Oh, I think the future is very powerful. I was watching the Microsoft conversation earlier this morning about being able to have a full-blown conversation with AI verbally, not just in writing or text. That almost scares me a little bit, because I've always, as a journalist, I've always been able to sort of just, like you were saying, the structure and have my words and nothing is fighting back at me. I mean, even when I use Grammarly now, it's a little bit intrusive and annoying, So I don't know if I necessarily want my AI to fight me back, but I still like to be in the lead in a sense. But it does sort of just watching that video of having a whole engagement with AI is really fascinating. I don't know from a wealth management perspective how useful that would be for the advisor. I think using large language modeling and just sort of streamlining that conversation, you still need that human. And even the people that I speak with every day who are using apps to invest in crypto or what have you, at the end of the day, they're still going to need somebody to guide them, and I don't think it's all going to be entirely
Yeah,
AI.
I agree. And I do find one thing that's interesting. I say this often when I talk to creators, not so much journalists, but creators. And that is that creators and writers have flexible minds, and so do journalists, and so do writers. And I often say, if you had 10 writers and you were giving them the same topic, each one of them would have a different lead, each one of them would have a different structure, all of which would be valuable if you had 10 professional writers, right? And I think as a writing exercise, that goes on in our mind, is that we look at alternatives, we turn them over in our mind, we see value in a lot of different approaches. So in that respect, someone once told me that before November 2022, everything was binary in AI. That you needed, ones and zeros, and you did coding, and that's how you interfaced with the machine. And when natural language processing became the new input, I find I can understand the flexibility that's within it, right? And so for me, I would see real value in a co-pilot that would collaborate with me, team members, and co-pilot all in the same room. To create a finished product. And in fact, for years, that's the way I would write, because to get scale, I just couldn't write everything myself. I'd have a screen on the wall, I'd call in my team members, and we would orchestrate a written piece. I would always say it, where people would start to talk, and I'd type as we went, and I would say, hold that thought. That's a little too granular up front, but it's a good point. But let's talk a broader approach up front. And that was my MO, because I had to direct other people. And I find that incredibly easy to replicate in the AI environment. Now that I have an assistant, I apply the exact same process, and it seems to do pretty well. I mean, some of it's scary, the quality you can get out of it. So, I think journalists have a different mission, but I would like to have that co-pilot in that room with me, with 4 other teammates, and say, yes, no, so think of this.
Yeah, to kind of relate that too to like the creatives, I think that's why I like the tech beat, because we're all sort of creatives and we can go, off into these like, well, what if you do this? And what, I do it all the time by accident in the middle of interviews. But there's also sort of an accidental handicap to that, in the sense that with wealth management, I think sometimes these tech providers get too creative and they forget what the need is for the advisor. And sometimes the advisor doesn't even know a need versus a want.
Right.
And, I was thinking about it because sometimes when I do interviews with a tech developer or what have you, I'll say, oh, why did you add that feature? Why did you do this particular aspect to your platform? And it's like, oh, well, it kind of was leading that way. I could see their creative going off. But they haven't said, well, we were talking to our clients, the advisors who had asked for X, Y, and Z, and so we developed this to meet that desire, and so there's sometimes a disconnect when you're creative. You get like too excited about what you want to make versus if it's actually going to work.
I was watching a podcast this morning on a thought leader in AI, and he was talking about ChatGPT just came out with what they're calling Canvas, and it sounds like the co-pilot, where you could work like that. You could identify a single line and say, just work on this and whatever. It's much more, I guess, engaging, and he loved it. And he made this point. He said, because, a lot of what's being developed has no value at all. Like it's really fun to create a 60-second video of a mastodon walking in the snow. Really, that's not going to get you ahead in the world. That's not, you're not going to be working on that, as most people aren't going to be creating that. But that ability maybe to collaborate, he thinks it's going to be transformative. And it's a prime example of what you're talking about, right? There's so much out there. Like, I have subscribed to Suno, to YGen, all these different AI, like, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to create an avatar of myself and to send company messages with my avatar, right? Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, then I could write it out, and I couldn't make it, and it would be no mistakes if I just had a Zoom call, right? Well, people found that really stupid and inauthentic, I got to tell you. They didn't like that at all, right? And so I haven't made any avatars recently because it was cool for the day, right?
Yeah.
But with no real business meaning. So I understand exactly what you're saying. I think with tech people, they become enamored with their own ability to do things, and there's no real need in the end. But there are real needs, and some of those needs we're seeing here today. Like we just saw the note-taking. I think that's a real administrative burden on a lot of financial advisors who would rather be freed up to build relationships, right, than to commit notes to a CRM somewhere.
Yeah, and I really hope when they say it saves them time, that they're using that time to be with the clients.
Right.
Because that's sort of the message I get constantly is, now thanks to AI, we have 2 extra hours. Well, what are you going to do with those 2 extra hours? Because we also talk about the great wealth transfer and how do we capture this? Well, you could spend that time going after organic growth.
Right. Well, I think that's the question for all of us in the economy of the future is what will we do with the extra time?
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's up for each of us to decide. I think we'll have more options because of it. Like, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I've always wanted an abundance of things, an abundance of ideas, an abundance of clients. and it wasn't really a money thing for me. It was just a stimulating thing that I wanted more, right? And I think with AI, I will always want more. I will never take a Wednesday off, afternoon off to golf, ever. I wouldn't do that. I would rather produce 4 great things and see if they stick, ideas or concepts or creative briefs or something like that. And it is interesting. I saw Andrew Yang talk a couple of weeks ago at an AI conference, and he does believe that it's going to create, he didn't call it this, but think of it as an automatic revenue generating enterprise that could create wealth, right? And he believes that we're going to have to tax compute and distribute that. And it'll be taxed at the compute level and not the individual enterprise level. And that could enable things we never even think about. It could power jobs that don't get paid today, or jobs that are underrepresented, not enough time to do, like being a great aunt, or being a great uncle, or being a great parent, or being a volunteer, or spending the next 3 months in Tampa Bay cleaning up after Hurricane Milton. Those kind of things don't get paid today, but maybe that's where we'll find meaning, because I do think we'll always have to have meaning in our lives.
Yeah.
And if it's just going to be that it's going to free up time to watch Netflix and play video games, that could be destructive. But I think most people want to contribute, and there are ways to contribute that right now they can't, because there's no revenue behind it. Right?
Yeah.
Teaching immigrants English, right? There's probably not enough human beings to teach immigrants English. But if you have a love of a language like I do, and you could support your family, maybe that will be something that will fill our time. So I don't know. I philosophize. Am I boring you?
No, I was definitely following you. You brought up I went to see my best friend in Texas, and we were at a karaoke bar for her birthday, and and this is the beauty of AI too, it's such a conversational...
And you go to karaoke, what is it? What is it?
Amy Winehouse.
Which one?
I have a very deep voice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's Rehab.
Rehab?
Yeah.
That's a great one.
I'm not in Rehab. I just like to sing the song.
I'm not either, but it's a great song.
Yeah, and it's, I'm a low voice, so it's easier to sing. I can get away with things that way, not getting too high, There'll never be a Lady Gaga. But, know your comfort in your area. But anyways, just by total mishap, one of the friends there that I just met that night, she worked in sort of like state healthcare programs, and she was talking about, we're trying to develop AI within an app, a health-based app and a job placement app for women getting out of prison. And so she was like, we're trying to get the word out. And I mean, that's a level of AI that helps. And they can just, when they get out, they have an app, they can find healthcare, they can help them find jobs. And so they're developing this tool, this application that anybody could use. And I mean, you're talking about like real on the ground helping people.
Right, right.
Not just, but the struggle with that, to your point too, is it's so hard to monetize that, and they're trying to find investments for it. And here you have these other applications that a ton of money, private equity and funds are being thrown at. And I think that's probably par for the course anyways, but with any new development. But there's some really powerful ways of applying AI that can help far greater populations than sort of what we're hearing about today.
Yeah, I talked to one advisor on my podcast, and he said his great love is financial literacy, and particularly in disadvantaged communities. His theory is that if we could teach more people the lexicon of money, we could bring more people into the circle of opportunity and affluence and abundance and improve their lives. And he said, I think AI is going to help me get there, because I can do my work, but then I could go down to the city center, right, and help young people understand the nature of money, which they don't have an opportunity to do. And I thought, if I was committed to an industry, that would make sense. Like, I'm committed to public relations, and in the last for years, I've really committed to teaching others how to use AI, and not for my own gain as much as for them to safeguard their careers, because I do think it poses a bit of an existential threat to those of us who don't master it or understand it, or at least have experimented and tried it with. So I digress. But anyway, it was a great conversation, and we share a lot in common because you're half Polish, half Italian.
Yeah, we probably have some relatives.
We probably do. If you're ever in Du Bois, Pennsylvania, you can see if there's any bloodlines that run together. But thanks for all you do with Financial Planning Magazine. And
thank you for having me.
I don't know if I really cherish the immensity of your job in covering AI at this point in the world. I just have to use it, but covering it breaks and moves so fast that it is a big assignment. So
honestly, I forget what I did the week before. There's so many tools.
I have to have Amanda remind me who my guests were last week, because I've decided that my brain is not an organ, it's just a streaming device. I just stream things forward, and I don't archive anything. So anyway, it's great meeting you, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're back for day 2 at the AdviseAI conference in Las Vegas. Day 1 was an amazing day. This is the first year for the conference that Financial Planning's putting on, and it has been really a high engagement opportunity to meet with RIAs and with vendors offering new AI solutions to help them run their business. I'm excited. I have with me Brooke Juniper. She's the CEO of Sage. They're coming at it in a little different direction than what we spoke about before. Her background really is in asset management. She worked in BlackRock for many years, and now is the CEO. They started about a year ago. Why don't you bring us up to speed about Sage and what it's doing?
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Sage, as you said, is a relatively new company. We're part of the Tiffin Group, which has really been a pioneer in the AI space. Many advisors and many of your listeners may be aware of 55IP. That was one of Tiffin's successful companies that was sold to JP Morgan a number of years ago, using AI for tax-effective implementation in portfolios. With the advent of ChatGPT, Tiffin has leaned into more conversational solutions for advisors, and Sage is one of those companies. So what we're doing at Sage is helping advisors deliver both personalization and scale in their investments. And what I hope is that we'll really blur the line between a rep as PM approach and a bespoke approach for every client, and a more models-based approach. So helping advisors have that discipline, repeatability across their entire book of business that models provide, but with the customization and tailored commentary that would come with a one-size-fits-one approach.
So I'm interested in this conversational side, because that is the genesis of a lot of generative AI. We think of ChatGPT in November of 2022, but before that, there's a whole era of conversational AI, and now it's being applied in the RIA space. Tell me a little bit about how it starts, what that process entails, and then how it unfolds to help the advisor do a better job of communicating with their client and building relationships.
Well, you're right. Conversational AI has been around for longer than just ChatGPT. The types of technologies that filter out spam in your email use these transformer models. Tiffin has a direct-to-consumer product, Magnify, that is actually natural language search that predated ChatGPT. But I think the power of ChatGPT and these large language models is the way that you can train them to solve a problem. And this is why conversational AI is so relevant to financial advice, because you have these evergreen tenets of risk and reward, taxes, financial situations, but everyone's portfolio is different, everyone's situation is different. And what a large language model allows you to do is you can train the language model on how to solve the problem. So you might think about, I've got my client coming in next week, and I'm worried about healthcare, and I need to go here and download their holdings and go to this other system and evaluate how much exposure they have, and then I've got to read some research, and then I've got to pull it all together, all these steps. You can actually teach the AI how to do those steps. And that's how the conversational AI works. You're basically saying, okay, here are the steps that you need to know and the information that you need to go and grab in order to answer this question. It's actually really cool to use generative AI to solve the problem more quickly in the same way that a human would.
And how's that done?
It.
Is that done through a series of agents, or is it done with machine learning? One of the problems I have with AI platforms is that when you don't know the programming behind it, when you don't know how to do it, it stops. It breaks down. Like in my business, I can't create an agent that would do what you're doing for the public relations industry. I mean, public relations, a lot of it is based on conversational. We interview our clients just like a journalist would, and then unfolds a whole cascade of steps and to-dos. But I try to write those prompts in ChatGPT, and it either gets confused or it gives me the end result without any type of intermediate steps. So tell us about how you've done that, the agents that are involved, and what it's doing behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So it is a multi-agent approach. So what we have done with Sage, and what is the leading edge of the industry, is to create agents to do specific tasks. So we have agents that will help with research extraction and application for a portfolio, and then there's a separate agent that would do scenario testing and analytics on a portfolio. And building in that business logic is super important. So it's the right question to ask, and I would encourage anyone in any industry who is considering using AI as part of their approach to understand what's under the hood, because it matters where the data comes from, how the model is fine-tuned, what the knowledge base is. And to answer your question more specifically, for Sage, we spend a lot of time fine-tuning the model to answer the question the right way. Which tools do they go to? So which services do they go to answer the question about what's the return of your portfolio, that it knows that it has to go to that place, and that here's the format we want that response to come back in. That all comes down to your training data.
So the personalization comes in many different inputs, I would imagine.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
So email, letters, onboarding information, personal meetings. Help me out. It comes where?
Yeah, so the personalization really comes at the portfolio holdings level and the goals level. So Sage is really focused more on the investment piece of the financial relationship, which is not the entirety of the planning relationship, not by a long shot. But we look at holdings, we look at research, and that research can come from the market writ large, publicly available sources of research, as well as for firms as well. So we work with a lot of enterprises who are loading their own private research that's available within their organization that they want their advisors using into that knowledge base. And then the personalization comes from the goals of the client, their risk profile, their needs, and then in the conversation as well, as the advisor is working through an investment scenario, Sage will actually ask the advisor, do you have a preference here? Are there any requirements that you're constraints that you have? So it prompts
the advisor.
Yes.
And the advisor sits in the center of this.
Yes.
Takes the information, vets the information, determines if it's appropriate, and then moves forward. So it doesn't displace the agent. It rather surfaces suggestions and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love this concept of augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. As Kitsis was talking about this before as well, is that, you don't want to automate. You want to do 80% of the job and really help the advisor move faster. So this is what we're trying to do at Sage. Surface options, look at a much broader array of information that an advisor could in their own time, and get them to the 5-yard line so that they can make the decision for the client.
So I'm armed with this now, and I can take a look at it and figure out how the steps as the advisor I would like to take to optimize it. And what does that do to the agent's relationship with the client? How does it impact that?
I think it allows the advisor to ultimately grow and have more clients. I think it allows them to have more scale across their book of business. A question that I love advisors to think about if they have a larger book of business is, your top 5 clients, your number 5 client, and then your number 50 client or your number 100 client. Do they get the same amount of care and attention when something is happening in the market or there is some change. And, no one ever has to answer that question, but I think technology can really help make sure that if there's something that's on the advisor's mind or something that needs to happen from an investment standpoint, that they can see across the entire book of business instantly.
And I think that's an important point that's often missed, right? As we're all human, and we tend to migrate to those things that have the most meaning to us, the most value for us. So if you have top 5 clients, you're going to be in their face, meeting with them, moving them forward. But it's those others who could emerge as major accounts in the future that are really what's churned a lot of times.
Yes, absolutely. And I think scale in the analytics and the preparation part of the process just gives the advisor more time to spend with those clients and with the piece that can't be scaled.
Right.
The human contact, the human touch, and kind of understanding where their clients need the most assistance.
And I see an application of multi-generation too. It's always amazing to me, the advisors I've worked with, very few of them have actually reached out and touched my children. And you would think that would be high on their agenda, but they're starting their careers. However, they're going to be coming into more wealth as they grow. They all have high, very good educations. They'll inherit some of my hard work and effort in the end. But because I'm in the maybe top 5-10%, right, and they're in the bottom 5, they're not really serviced at all, or they don't even go for it. So I would see this is an awesome way to build your future value of your agency by servicing everyone equally, or at least being able to bring them into the circle and provide support and service.
Absolutely. And it's about it's about cost, and I think that wherever we can provide scale in the non-client touching things that an advisor is doing, we make it easier for them to be able to spend the time with clients who are up and coming.
Tell me about your idealized prospect, client, the user of Sage.
Yeah.
What does this advisory look like?
So I think that we talk to both enterprise clients because the power of Sage is really unlocked by integrating with the account management platform. So that means for a larger firm, it's got to be the firm that wants to make that decision, because I can't walk in and have a conversation with an advisor from UBS or Morgan Stanley and be able to connect Sage to their accounts. So we talk to those firms at the top-down level. Independent RIAs who are using Schwab or Fidelity or Orion or any of these platforms, we can turnkey integrate into those with Sage so that they can see their entire book of business. So independent RIAs we love. And then in terms of the practice shape, I talked about rep as PM and model-based practices. I mean, the truth is that all advisors have some of this spectrum. It's not like you do all of one and not the other. So I think all across the spectrum, for advisors who are rep as PM, who are interested in building more scale into their practice but still want to have their hands on the wheel a little bit with investments, Sage can be fantastic. For model-based advisors, I think Sage really helps at the end of the process, helping to create commentary and insights and help make those model portfolios more personal to the individual client.
Now help me out. You came from BlackRock and now you're in the advisory market. What's the biggest surprise that you've had in the transition in your career?
Ooh, that's a good question. When I was at BlackRock, I was looking after the digital kind of advice solutions that BlackRock had, a product called the Advisor Center. So I've been building portfolio tools for advisors for a long time now. I think what was really incredible to me to come from such a large company to a startup like Tiffin was the singular focus. I can move so much faster with this dedicated focus on Sage as a product than I ever could at BlackRock, because my entire goal is serving clients with this product.
So you can go on a podcast and don't have to get clearance from BlackRock PR and communications people. So that is definitely an advantage. That's an advantage to me.
Absolutely.
Right? And
absolutely.
Well, it's been a great conversation, and you are moving quickly. You now have this installed in 30 different
we do. we do,
advisories?
and I can't name them, but we have several enterprises that we're
well,
working
maybe
with
we'll
as
torture you and get some of those names out of you. But that's great traction within the year. I hope for great things in the future. Thanks for sharing your expertise, insight into what you see is going on in creating these digital tools and the impact of AI. It's a special interest of us at Gregory FCA. We're a public relations agency that's AI enabled, and we were an early adapter as far as this revolution in the last, certainly not as long as you've been at it, but for about 4 years we've been working on this. We were first to develop an in-house platform for generative AI development in PR with ChatGPT-2.
Fantastic.
And it hallucinated a lot, and it said strange things in the beginning, but even then we saw the brilliance of what the future would hold, and we've really committed to it and reinvented our own firm. And in fact, the podcast is an outcrop of that. So I thank you for being with us, and best of luck, and we'll stay in touch and check back when you're 100 million, 200 million,
Excellent.
500 million.
I'd love to see you next year.
Take care.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Our conversations continue here at AdviseAI. We've had a spectacular morning meeting with entrepreneurs, and I'm really interested in our next guest. He's a professor at Columbia University. Harry Mamaysky is the CEO of QuantStreet Capital, and he has a really deep background in computational linguistics, which is weird because I'm always fascinated by listening to how people have unraveled the riddle of language and technology and computers, because I'm a business writer by trade. Harry, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Glad
Tell
to
us
be
a little bit about your journey. You started as a pure academic, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I started as an academic. I was teaching at the Yale School of Management. I was there for 2 years. I did my PhD at MIT in finance, and I also have a computer science undergrad and master's degree. And at some point at Yale, I asked my senior colleagues, how come you guys let me teach students how to invest? Because I don't really know how to invest, but yet I teach courses on investment. And they told me, well, expectations are pretty low, you're a junior professor, no one thinks you know very much, and you'll learn more over time. And I asked them, well, why don't you let me go work in industry for a year so I learned something? And they thought that was unusual, but they were very nice and they let me do it. So I took a year leave of absence to go work at Morgan Stanley in a proprietary trading group there. But I was learning so much, and I was so excited to be involved with markets that I ended up staying. So my 1 year leave turned out to be a 12 or 13 year leave from academia. And it was in my experience as a proprietary trader on Wall Street that I began to understand the power of language in financial markets. Like you said you were a writer. So, I have a quantitative background, and I was trading credit, like corporate bonds and derivatives in corporate bonds. And we built models, and we had our own analytics and all that cool stuff. But I found that the majority of my working day was spent just reading. I read 10Ks and Qs, and I listened to earnings calls, and I would read analyst reports and trade ideas that came to us from our salespeople at different Wall Street firms. And it kind of occurred to me during that time, it's incredibly inefficient for me to read all this stuff because I need the information, but isn't there a better way to do this? Can't machines help us do this?
And this came to you when? Give me a time frame.
So the time frame was probably 2010 to 12. What had happened was because of the upheaval after the global financial crisis, a lot of the proprietary trading businesses on Wall Street were shut down because of regulations. We'd actually done pretty well. I was working at Citigroup at the time, and they asked me to start a group in the risk division. I was reporting to our chief risk officer at Citigroup at the time, and our group was called the Systemic Risk Group, and we were tasked with monitoring information globally to think about where there were emerging risks in the world. And in doing that job, for which we didn't use computational linguistics, actually, it occurred to me it's really impossible to do this job without ingesting thousands and thousands of articles every single day and getting the computer to summarize for us what they're saying, because otherwise we don't have any hope of following all the stuff going on in the world. And thinking back to my undergrad and master's degree work in computer science and my interest in finance, I sort of thought, wow, this natural language processing, computational linguistic stuff is just going to change the world of finance, in addition to the world at large. And I had a chance to go back to academia through some folks I had met over my time at Citi. And so I came back to Columbia Business School full-time, I think in 2016. So I've been there since shockingly long at this point. But what really drove me to do that was I wanted to do research at the intersection of computational linguistics and finance because I thought it was such an amazing area.
And before we went live, you were telling me about dissecting a lot of that media, and you had said identifying what's new.
Yeah.
And that was a particular interest to me because news, the root of the word is new.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that and what it really took to be able to summarize and understand this financial language.
Sure. So great question. And I think here we can see how the revolution that's taken place since the introduction of ChatGPT has transformed a lot of the cutting edge work we were already doing in academia. So one of the things you notice when you trade, when you're an investor, like what we do at QuantStreet, one of the things you notice is that when new information comes out, that's really important. And what the markets are always doing is figuring out what is the meaning of this new information. Like markets don't care about old information. Like if you write the same article regurgitating stuff that's already known, it's unlikely to have a big impact on prices. But the new information is really crucial. So when I came to Columbia, one of the first papers I started working on with my colleague at Columbia, Paul Glasserman, was this idea that can we quantify the unusualness of language? And at the time, we weren't using neural networks. We were using
the unusualness of language.
Yeah, unusualness of language. So for example, if you saw a phrase like Lehman Brothers went blank, what would you expect to follow Lehman Brothers went? Like, well, prior to 2008, you would have thought Lehman Brothers went and hired a new investment banker, or they went and set up some charitable foundation, but you would never have thought went bankrupt. Right? Bankrupt was just like a stunningly unusual word. So we thought, look, a lot of news that's unusual will be associated with linguistic structures that are unusual, like words following other words that they don't usually follow. And can we spot that using computers?
And this is interesting because it's almost counter to what ChatGPT does, right? It's predictive of what will follow. I always give the example before ChatGPT was linked to the internet, right? I typed in, tell me about Silicon Valley Bank last March or whenever it went, and it gave me a Wikipedia page about, it's the bank, it lends to high-flying startups and it's in Silicon Valley and it's related to VCs and whatever. And so then I said, tell me about Silicon Valley Bank bankruptcy.
Yep.
And it said, Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt after having a bad loan portfolio, which sounds correct because every bank, that's how they go bankrupt.
Yeah.
But that's not the story. They didn't hedge their bond portfolio.
Right. Too much duration. Yeah.
So, that's a great example of when people say hallucinations. Is that really a hallucination, or do I really not understand how the machine is working, right?
So you ask a really deep question that gets at the heart of what these models are doing, and it also relates to our measure of language unusualness. So when we started doing that project, we used something called n-grams, like 2 grams, 3 grams, and the idea there is you basically find the phrase Lehman Brothers went, and in your historical training data, identify all the words that follow that phrase, and if you see a word in a new article that had never followed that phrase before, you call it unusual. So that's kind of the old way of doing things. That's the circa 2014 way of doing things. What these large language models do at the heart of that architecture is they build a probability model for language. So they're able exactly to answer the question, given the phrase Lehman Brothers went, what is the probability distribution of all the future words that could follow that phrase? And prior to the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, it would never have thought bankruptcy was a very likely word to follow that phrase. But it would give you a distribution of other words, like went and started a foundation, went and hired an investment banker. And when you ask ChatGPT, like you just said, a question and it hallucinates, what is it actually doing? Or any other, like Gemini, any other large language model.
Right.
It's building internally a probability distribution over words, and it plucks out of that probability distribution the next word that it thinks is relatively likely to follow the phrase that you primed it with. So when you ask it a question, like why did Silicon Valley Bank go bankrupt, it internally processes that, converts it to an internal numerical representation, then comes up with a distribution. Well, what words are likely to follow your question? And then it starts giving you words that things are probabilistically likely to follow your question. What it doesn't know is the ground truth. It doesn't know, did this actually happen? Did it not happen? It just gives you a string of words that, based on its probabilistic model, seem very likely.
Right.
And a hallucination is when that likely string of words just happens to be counterfactual, that it's not actually true.
Right.
So they're working on capabilities.
That's what's going on.
Right. They're working on capabilities for these models to be able to actually figure out, is the answer true? So, for example, if you go, Google's large language model is called Gemini. If you type in a search in Gemini, ask it a question, it has a way of then verifying the answer by doing a Google search. So they've sort of combined, it's like a two-step process. One, the LLM answers, but the second stage of the process is a verification of the answer using Google's search engine capability. So, but it's very much an open and hard question. How do you get these models to give you factually correct answers as opposed to hallucinated answers? And it's I think it's not fully solved yet.
So let's shift gears then at QuantStreet. What's that all about? How does it interface with the advisory market, and why you're here today?
Great question. Well, thank you for that question. So when I worked on Wall Street, I traded credit, as I already mentioned, and I knew and I know a lot about financial markets, but I had never spent a lot of time thinking about my own asset allocation. I bought this, I bought that. I never holistically thought about what does my portfolio look like in terms of my own financial planning, in terms of the correlations of all the different asset classes I've accumulated. Exactly. And when I was at Columbia, I was working on an executive education program, basically teaching wealth advisors how they should invest on behalf of their clients. In doing that, I created a lot of analytics that I was using to teach in my course, and then it just occurred to me, why don't we use a lot of the analytics that I've already developed to teach people how to do portfolio allocations and actually create a service where we can do intelligent portfolio allocations on behalf of clients. And so that's the genesis of QuantStreet. We do two businesses. One is we run accounts for individual investors. So people come to us and we talk to them about their financial plans and their situation of their family and wealth, et cetera, and create allocations that make sense for them. Which is traditional work that investment advisors do. In addition to that, we think we have some really cool analytics for thinking about portfolio allocation and market forecasting, and we sell those analytics as a service to other investment advisors. So people will come to us and we sell them our model portfolios as a subscription service and our forecasting analytics. And what it allows our clients to do is, when they are talking to their clients and their client asks them, well, why did you do this allocation? Why did you do that allocation? They can give them a really robust, intellectually coherent answer. They can say, well, we know that gold is forecastable by such and such a factor. We internally were using machine learning, all this stuff to make those forecasts, but from our RIA client's point of view, they get a forecast, gold. Here's what drives gold: the interest rate differential of dollar versus German bonds, for example, and our 2-year rate. And here's the forecast we have a year ahead. But in addition to that, here is the volatility of gold, and here's the correlation of gold with the other assets you have in the portfolio. And by the way, in down markets, gold often does well, to use gold as an example. So we give them a lot of reasons, a lot of intellectual rigor for why we would add a gold allocation to the portfolio that their clients really value, because their clients come to them and they just have a higher level conversation with advisors who use our service, because they can really communicate to them the rigorous intellectual decision-making process that went into a portfolio allocation, as opposed to just saying, well, we thought it was a good idea. And our clients really value that.
Now let me push against the corner, because I'm fascinated by what's happening with linguistics and machine learning. I'm a storyteller. Now that we have machines that tell stories, how is that going to affect our world, our reality? Do you think that the onslaught of machine-generated content, when it's used to retrain these models, could actually degrade language?
So that's a great question. And I don't have the answer to that. I think we are in a regime transition in the history of humankind, really, where in the past we've been able to automate a lot of manual labor tasks and other aspects that make our life more comfortable, like have air conditioning, which we never had up until the last 50 years or so. But what we now have the capability of doing is taking some tasks that used to be entirely in the domain of human capability and outsource them to machines. And frankly, we don't know how this process will work its way, through our society. I'm an optimist, so I think that humanity augmented with these tools will be better than humanity without them. But there are certainly a lot of causes for concern. For example, from an educational point of view, a lot of our students are using these tools, and it's unrealistic to say you can't use these tools.
Yeah,
it's like saying don't use a calculator.
Right.
Of course, you're not going to.
It's here.
It's here, and so we have to figure out as educators, how do we incorporate these tools into the way we teach people. But also, what kind of skills do we want people to have? Is it as important nowadays to teach kids how to spell? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, these are so
comma.
good.
You really have to know the rule.
Do you really need to know all those rules? Maybe we can skip some of that stuff and teach kids more conceptual information rather than stuff that's just rote learning, because these machines can do a lot of that kind of spell checking and grammatical checking for people. So I don't know what the right answer is. I think we're struggling. But the other thing you alluded to is, where does the content come from? So for example, at QuantStreet, we're a big consumer of Bloomberg data. Bloomberg has a lot of machine-generated news. We have capabilities where machines can also read the news. So we are already in a world where machines are writing news and then other machines are reading the news, but they're using a highly inefficient intermediate product of human language to do that communication, which also doesn't even make sense. Like, if two machines are going to talk to each other, why do they have to do it through human language?
Why do they need an interpreter?
Why can't they do it through a more efficient way of communication? So that's one question. But
why can't we do it more efficiently?
Yeah, why can't we do it more efficiently? But the other question is, how do you train these models, right? So, all the major AI companies are out there in a quest to get data, right? So where do they get the data? Well, you have Wikipedia, you have all the digitized books we have in the history of humanity, you have newspapers, but these machines are greedy for information. You need to feed them more and more content. So the question is, can machines generate their own content to train other machines to do what they do better? In some cases, yes. There's a field of AI called reinforcement learning, which is how you teach machines to play Atari video games, and also how you teach robots to navigate complex environments, and how you teach self-driving cars not to, run into telephone poles. So there's already precedent of machines teaching other machines how to act in the context of things like reinforcement learning. Why can't we do that with language? So machines are really greedy for data, for text data. A lot of the value of some of the social media platforms we have today isn't in the advertising that they facilitate, it's in taking those data and feeding them to AI models to train the AI models on what's currently being talked about across various domains of discussion in social media. So that's one of the big values of social media firms. So why can't machines generate their own text to teach other machines how to be better learners and how to better interpret language? To some extent, people are experimenting with doing that now, and that could be the future as well, that machines write their own stories, and then you teach other models using the stories written by other machines. Why does that have to be written by humans? I mean, this is all like Brave New World stuff.
So I've got another question for you. Yeah. Because one of the shortcomings of a lot of generative AI content, right, is it does follow the tradition, the legacy, the training model, right? Yeah. Is there any way to get more unusual language into these models? Because that's the real gift. I think of the letter that John Steinbeck wrote to Marilyn Monroe. You read that letter and you say there's a lot of unusual language in there, and it's glorious in how elegant it's written, right? And I always point to that. Machine can't come close to that. Now it can certainly do a Wikipedia page, it can certainly do a news release, but when it comes to unusual language, it falls short. In fact, we have a whole list. Like, if you see any of these words, it's machine generated, because it just repeats certain techniques that generally were not considered great writing. For instance, it uses a lot of subheads. It uses a lot of colons, which is weird. We were getting away from colons as storytellers, and now they're appearing everywhere.
Right.
It's an SEO trick that I think infects. So is there any way to get more unusual language in there?
So this is another great question. There are so many great questions around this area. So one of the problems, as you mentioned, is machines learn from what the data are that they are given to be trained on. And another manifestation of this is machines learn all the bad stuff that we've generated as a species as well.
Every quote in a machine-generated news release starts, "We are thrilled," and you're like, "Don't ever say that. Don't ever say that."
But they also learn racism and they learn sexism. Like they don't have any moral judgment. So you give them a piece of text, they read that text, they think, "Oh, this is the probabilistic structure of language," and they just regurgitate that stuff. So I think there are lots of deep questions about, can you get machines to be super creative? I'm not sure. I mean, right now, I would say they are great interpolation tools in the sense of, like, you give them the broad outlines of what things look like and they can kind of answer questions given the context that they've been trained with. Can you ask them to rise above that? I think it becomes a question, well, what do you train them to do? Right? Like the way that all these machines have been trained, what is called success is, can you forecast correctly the next word that comes in your training corpus? That's the objective function. Right. And sometimes not the next word, sometimes the prior word. But the overall way these things are trained is they give it language, they don't tell it, they blank out a word in the middle of text, they blank out a word that follows the text, and they say fill in the blank. Build a probabilistic model that is good at figuring out the words that were next. These machines have not been trained with a different objective function, which is, we're going to give you 100 human-scored pieces of text based on originality and novelty and just interest that human readers have in it, and we want you to generate something better than that. So it's not a matter of fill in the blank. We don't care that you can guess at what the humans wrote. We want you to do better. We want you to use your probabilistic model, but come up with the 101st story that's better than the 100 that you were fed. So there are techniques to do that. Again, there's something called inverse reinforcement learning, where machines are given sort of outcomes, but they don't know the objective function, and they're supposed to learn the objective function as part of the process.
Interesting.
So you could ask machines okay, here's 100 ranked articles. We don't even know what the objective function is, but you have to learn the objective function that would have classified these in the same order that we gave them to you. Using that objective function, give us a new piece of text that's going to be better than these 100
I'm going to try that, because one of the things that machines do very poorly is humor, right?
Yeah.
You ask a try, these are not funny jokes coming back. I would love now, you got me thinking, to give the punchline and say, what would be the joke here, right?
Yeah, or give it 10 prior jokes and ask it, write a better one than that. Here's 10, and we think this one's okay, and this one's pretty good, and this one's the best. So knowing that ranking, see if you can come up with one that's better, based implicitly on the ranking I gave you, and also, your probabilistic model.
I'd love to test that with ChatGPT, because it's one thing, for no professional reasons, but I played with it with humor to understand, what are the limits, and I say, it's got a limit, it's got a ceiling, it doesn't understand sarcasm, or it doesn't understand the joke. But I'd love to feed some in and see if it could do it but it's been a fascinating conversation. We could go on forever, Harry, because your knowledge is like, I could drink from the fire hose for an hour here or 2 hours, because it's really an interest of mine. How did we create this as human beings, the ability to tell stories, and where does that make us human? I think in some ways that's the unique trait of human beings, and what does the implications of having machines do it for us now? So best of luck with QuantStreet Capital, but also let's stay in touch, because
absolutely.
I feel as if I learned a lot here in the last 30 minutes.
I would love to. Thanks for having me. Okay.
This podcast is a production of Gregory FCA. If you enjoyed our discussion today and want to continue exploring the transformative power of AI, please check out more episodes and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.